This past week marked the 30th anniversary of the death of Bruiser Brody, who at the time was one of the biggest stars in all of professional wrestling, major draw. He was, of course, we all know the story of how he was murdered in Puerto Rico. But before we get to that, I wanted to pay tribute to him, and the way I want to pay tribute to him was the documentary that was released by High Spots last year, Bruiser Brody Wrestling / Rebel. I wanted to review this documentary and to pay tribute to the Bruiser Brody. And of course, the incident in Puerto Rico, which was his murder, is covered greatly in this documentary. But this documentary isn't just necessarily a downbeat documentary about, Bruiser Brody being murdered and all the stuff. That's a huge part of it. But the first, it's about a 2-hour documentary, very long, but it's a great documentary. It's by High Spots. They have plenty of wrestlers, so many wrestlers they interviewed, they got here. They had so many people in the business. They had Dutch Mantel, they had Tony Atlas, they had Bruiser. The whole thing is narrated by Bruiser Brody's wife. His widow, actually. His widow basically narrates the whole documentary, and it's been 30 years, and she has a lot and she talks on documentary a lot. You have Tony Atlas. The stuff with Tony Atlas is just, man, I feel really bad for him he has to relive that. Dutch Mantel, virtually, almost everyone who was there at the time. And of course, people talk about his current career. You had Billy Graham. You have Stan Hansen. You have Bruno Sammartino doing an interview, and this was recorded before he passed away. You have Dave Meltzer, who has a big part in this documentary. And I'm forgetting more guys. I wish I could get some more wrestlers, but there was plenty of guys who had a big part in this documentary. So when we talk about it, it starts off, they talk about Bruiser Brody's early life. His wife talks about him, and he had a football career. He tried out for the Washington Redskins, didn't make it. How they met, they fell in love, and then of course they really go through his big run in Japan. Dave Meltzer talks about some stuff in Japan and the problems with him and Antonio Inoki, who was the booker of New Japan at the time, and there was a lot of problems. And there's problems in All Japan as well. He was in both of them. They talk about the problems with him as a promoter, the way he treated other promoters. He was his own promoter. He was an independent contractor. He was a real independent contractor, not the fake independent contractors that WWE has now. He was a real independent contractor. He treated himself as one. Everyone else is technically independent contractor, but really are treated like employees. He was that guy. So they really talk a lot about New Japan. He was the biggest star easily in Japan. That was definitely when he became huge. There's a lot of stuff about WWF as well, but the whole thing leads to just the problems he'd have with promoters. He wouldn't put guys over. There's an infamous story with Bruiser Brody and Lex Luger inside a cage. Supposedly Luger Brody was going to win, but Luger was leaving, and Luger says, "I can't lose to you," and that's what Brody used to always do. But what happened was during the match, Brody was scheduled to win, but Luger was scared of Brody. He wouldn't sell for him, so he just ran out of the cage. It was a famous story, very well known. Some of his matches were definitely some really memorable matches. Really, he was such a violent wrestler. This guy had one of the meanest looks. His matches were violent as hell. They'd have wars or so many wrestlers. And the whole documentary really it chronicles his career. His wife tells a large portion of his life through his early childhood to his wrestling career and his stardom. His rise to superstardom became a major draw. And of course, it all leads to, we're here, Puerto Rico. So, July 16th, 1988 is when it happened. His wife talks a lot about stuff that happened earlier. She was actually supposed to be at the Puerto Rico show with him, but she had a miscarriage. She was pregnant, she had a miscarriage, and she decided to stay home with her son, who already had a son. And he went there, and of course they go through everything. They show Carlos Colon, doing an interview with High Spots, I think it was, or sorry, RF Video. I think that's who it was. Of course, he completely dodges the question. So Buddy Landell is talking to Bruiser Brody. He tells the story how he was having lunch with Brody before Brody was murdered. And, it's like he thinks Brody had a premonition before he died, and he was talking with God and family. He never really talked about that. So his interview is from 2009. So Dutch Mantel, you remember him as Zeb Coulter in WWE. He's talking a lot about this. He's saying, he admitted, in Puerto Rico there was always tension. He never felt comfortable there, and he felt like there was something wrong. He actually left the locker room. And Tony Atlas is like, he remembers everything in detail. He's talking about how they arrived and how Jose, the man who killed him, the invader one, that piece of shit motherfucker, he was supposed to pick up Brody, but he was already at there. So like, they were gonna arrange it. He was gonna tell the front desk that Jose Gonzalez didn't need to pick him up, but he was already there. And he recalls seeing Carlos Colon, Jose, and another guy in a football huddle talking about what they're gonna do. So Tony Atlas, again in detail, what he says is so he draws a lot. He's a great drawer, and Brody was impressed by it. He asked him to draw a picture of his son, so he took a picture from his wallet of his son, and Atlas is drawing. And then as soon as he does that, Jose, he asks him to meet with him, and talks to him, and they go there and they talk. It's near the showers, and Atlas was sitting on a chair in the locker room. It's about, he says, 3-4 feet from the showers. So the invader, he had a towel covering the knife under it, so he was carrying a towel, and Atlas didn't mind it. He didn't pay attention because wrestlers always have towels. So as soon as they step in the shower, Atlas remembers hearing Brody gasping for his life. He lets out 2 grunts, and he's being stabbed. So Atlas says when he goes into the shower, and as he's about to get in, this is a locker room shower, Carlos Colon cuts him off. He sees the invader, Jose. He shoves him against the wall and holds a knife, stopping him, yelling, "No, Jose, no!" And then Atlas is able to get Brody out of there, and he even says this extremely graphic. As he was helping him, he grabbed him by his waist, and he says Brody's intestine fell on his arm. And then, Brody's saying, "Don't let them hurt me, don't let them hurt me." And Atlas, is saying, "I'm going to go there, he says, I'm going to break Jose's fucking neck." And I wish he actually did. It would have been awesome. It would have been such karma, even though, Tony Atlas would have, he had to spend the rest of his life in a Puerto Rican prison. But I wish, he would have gotten away with it. It would have been perfect justice if he would have got to snap Jose's neck. And he would have. If you've seen that guy's arms, my God. He'd even need one. He'd only need one arm. Just grab him, hold him with the other arm, and just could snap his neck, and his head would be like The Exorcist. That's exactly where he deserves. That's what Jose would deserve. More wrestlers are talking about it, and they're talking about how the instances, they're trying to, it seems like everyone in Puerto Rico was probably in on it. They all knew. They were trying to make it a fan stabbed Brody. There's reports he hit his head on the sink. Ugh, it's such bullshit. This is the worst thing that's happened, one of the worst things ever in wrestling. And we could talk about there's other things, of course, the Benoit tragedy, but I'm talking about inside from wrestler to wrestler. Because Benoit was his personal family, even though a woman was in the business. But this is up there. This has to be the worst. A wrestler stabbing a wrestler to death in the locker room, and the way it was handled, the way the whole company was in on it, and Carlos Colon had ties to the Puerto Rican government. Just such a fucking travesty. This is extremely disturbing. Dutch Mantel talks how they were finally able to get the ambulance there, and it took them 45 minutes to get to the fucking baseball stadium where the event was taking place. Oh, such fuck off, Puerto Rico, for the way you handled this. It's everyone was in on it, I swear. So Tony Atlas is talking about how the wrestlers would just turn their heads. I don't know if all the wrestlers are Puerto Rican, but some of them were American, and they would just lace their boots, not helping him, and he had to carry Brody, put him on the gurney. And when they got to the hospital, he went to the hospital with Brody. The doctor was letting Brody bleed to death, and Brody was just laying there bleeding. And Tony Atlas had to take this doctor, pick him up, and carry him to the room to check on Brody. And then The hospital had to be in on it too. It's like he sees Brody's feet, and it's blue, and he's about to die. Like that's when someone's dying, and then like Atlas has to, like, he eventually leaves, and like they tell Atlas he's in stable condition, everything's okay. They sewed it back together, his intestines back together. It's like, oh. These fucking lying pieces of shit doctors, these motherfuckers. It's like the amount of pain this guy had to go through, like holding his intestines. Oh, God, fuck you, Carlos Colon. Fuck you, Jose Gonzalez. Jesus Christ. This Puerto Rico, I'm so happy this ruined the scene in Puerto Rico, and it never deserves to recover after this. So Tony Atlas, he's talking about how he went back into the dressing room, and all the wrestlers told the cop that a fan had stabbed Brody, and he said it was the Invader who did it, and then the cop looked surprised, and it's like, ugh, it's disgusting. I bet all the American wrestlers were probably like scared for their lives there too. So Brody's wife Barbara, she's eventually contacted, and later she has to call. She calls Brody's hotel room, and she talks to Dutch Mantel, who's there, and tells Barbara what happened. So Dutch Mantel, he talks about when he's in his hotel room, he goes down to the lobby and sees a woman working there, and she's young. He says she's a Puerto Rican girl who can speak English, and she was a younger girl who grew up in Chicago, and he asks her to call the hospital and check on Brody, and he tells she's talking English, and she turns in Spanish, and that was a scary sign, because if someone who can speak two languages, they can talk to you in English. Like if there's something bad going on, they can sometimes switch to their native language, and that's scary. And that's what I think Dutch Mantel experienced. And she tells him, "I'm sorry your friend died last night," and that was just what a horrible death for Brody. It just sucks. So Tony Atlas talks about he has to go see Brody's wife. I think she was at the airport, and he needed someone to go with him. He was nervous, and one guy who went with him was Sika from the Wild Samoans, and that's Roman Reigns' father. To let everyone know. So he was one of the toughest guys, and he felt safe. Tony Atlas going with Sika, and they were scared, man. All these wrestlers were scared that they were gonna die. So the person who had to break the news to Barbara, Brody's wife, was Abdullah the Butcher, and he runs out of the airport. He tells her, just what a horrible way to know your husband died. Abdullah the Butcher was probably scared for his life too, and he leaves this damn island. You just know the court system, how corrupt it is, and how the trial was handled after Brody's death. It's just disgusting. They didn't want anyone there. They didn't want Dutch Mantel there. They didn't want Tony Atlas there. They didn't want Young Bloods there. They didn't want anyone who was there to witness and to testify against them. And Dutch Mantel even says he already knew the verdict before he even read the subpoena. It's just disgusting. Frank Goodman's death, it's just such a horrible tragedy in wrestling. So it's just great that all the wrestlers, almost none of them went back. Some of them did, but the majority of them never went back to Puerto Rico. And he just learned stuff about how Jose Gonzalez, he became a booker there, and Carlos Colon did an angle with it not too long ago, 6-7 years ago. Fucking disgusting. But Frank Goodman's death, one of the really tragic stories in wrestling history, and a great career. Bruiser Brody is a legend, and you hear his wife talking about the what ifs. They have Brody going to WWF, WWE now. Everyone talked about him and Hogan would have made one of the biggest matches in wrestling history. It would have been a WrestleMania main event. That would have just been huge. And that was going to be his last destination. I think he wanted to go to WWF, make a huge payday, all that money drawing against Hogan, and then retire. Several of the wrestlers remember him at the end, and his wife remembers him. So rest in peace to Frank Goodman, Bruiser Brody, one of the greatest legends in wrestling history.